Before my 73rd birthday party, my lawyer called and warned me, if anyone hands you any paperwork tonight, do not sign it under any circumstances. But what he said after that was what truly unsettled me. At the party, while everyone was raising glasses and celebrating me, my 9-year-old granddaughter suddenly disappeared. 2 hours later, a video call appeared on my phone. She was tied up in a dark room surrounded by kidnappers. Then they made demands that sent a chill down my spine because hours earlier, my lawyer had already warned me this might happen. There's a photograph on my desk, Cecilia, 20 years younger, laughing at something just outside the frame. Some nights I sit before it and put questions to her that she can no longer answer. On the worst of those nights, I ask the one question I cannot stop turning over in my hands, like a stone that refuses to go smooth. Did I deserve what happened? I still don't know, but I know precisely where it began. October 12th, 2023, my 73rd birthday. A gathering I never asked for, held in a house that had been too silent for too long, filled with faces I could barely place anymore. Welcome to Father's silent revenge, where real pain, real betrayal, and the long road back to justice are told with honesty and care. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found us. Stay close and follow along so you don't miss what comes next. Before we go further, tell me in the comments. Is it morning where you are, afternoon, or are you up late the way people are when something won't let them rest? A note before we begin, some elements of this story have been shaped for the purpose of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real persons or events is coincidental. What matters most here is the truth at the center of it. It started there, and it started with her. Saturday evening, Hartwell Estate, Westport, Connecticut. By 4 o'clock, the caterers had commandeered my kitchen, and 3 hours later, the back terrace was humming with 50-some guests, drifting between the open bar and the jazz trio Corinne had hired. Crystal stemware caught the garden light, and voices braided together, the way they do when people are working at being happy rather than actually feeling it. I was holding a scotch. I had no intention of finishing standing in the east hallway when Fletcher Dunbar came around the corner. 18 years as my personal attorney had made Fletcher precise and spare a man for whom small talk was physically impossible. His jacket was already buttoned at 7 in the evening, and that single detail told me the kind of conversation he was carrying. "Happy birthday," he said, barely above a murmur. "Walk with me for a minute." "Fletcher, it's my birthday." "I know it is." He guided me quietly toward the window alcove, away from anyone close enough to hear. "I've been calling you since Thursday. There's a filing attached to the charitable trust structure that has no business being there. A transaction money moved in a way the current board configuration shouldn't allow." I felt a line form between my brows. "What transaction exactly?" "That's the problem. I can't tell you yet. I haven't got the full picture." He held my eyes. "But Conrad, if somebody puts paper in front of you tonight, anything, a document, a form, something that looks entirely ordinary, walk away from it. Don't pick it up. Don't put your name on it. Ring me before you do anything." I looked at him carefully. Fletcher was not a man who conjured trouble for the sport of it. In all those 18 years, every alarm he had raised turned out to be warranted. But my house held 50-some people. At that moment, Cecilia's favorite song was finding its way in from the terrace, and the exhaustion I was carrying was the particular kind, the bone-deep sort, that accumulates in men who have refused for too long to put anything down. "Monday," I told him. "Come Monday morning, and we'll go through every page of it." He kept his eyes on mine a half-second past, comfortable. "Monday, then," he said very quietly. "Have a good evening, Conrad." He went out through the front, and I stayed in the alcove a moment longer, turning what he'd said end over end in my mind, then made a deliberate choice to set it aside until morning. One night, just one night. Then I heard her. "Grandpa," not called, announced. Piper came barreling around the corner from the dining room. Her yellow dress with braids half escaped from whatever Corinne had carefully constructed that morning. Cheeks blazing from running, she seized both my hands and threw her full 60 lb weight backward. "You said you weren't going to hide," she announced in the tone of someone filing a formal complaint. "I'm not hiding, I'm talking. You were by a window by yourself making your sad face. Piper, that is simply my face." "Grandpa!" Another hard tug of laugh breaking through. "The cake's almost ready, and Mrs. Colfax told me you've been missing for 20 minutes. and people keep wondering where you went. I told them you were probably off thinking about something dull like work, and everyone laughed, so I was right. She looked up at me, gap-toothed radiant with self-assurance. Please come outside. For me? Something gave way inside my chest in the best way it can. For you, I said. It's always for you. She lit up like I had offered her something priceless and towed me up the hallway toward the terrace doors, two of my fingers enclosed in her hand, the way they had been since she first learned to walk. The music swelled. Through the glass, the garden lights were warm and gold and soft at the edges. It was 7:38. I know the exact time because I glanced at my watch as we stepped out. 30 years of chairing board meetings will do that to a man. 7:38. Piper was already beside me, pitching her voice across the lawn at someone. At 7:40, one of the catering staff touched me lightly on the arm. Mr. Hartwell, I apologize for the interruption. A child went back inside a few minutes ago. I just wanted someone to be aware. I swept my eyes across the space around me. The terrace, the garden, every face. Piper wasn't there. Piper. I called toward the house, calm because she was forever slipping off to find a bookshelf. Come back outside, sweetheart. Silence. I stepped inside and raised my voice, moving through the hallway, the sitting room, the foot of the stairs. People on the terrace began to register that something had shifted. I went faster, one room feeding into the next, and whatever composure I was managing started to fray my voice, climbing and cracking in ways I had no power to stop her name becoming something unrecognizable. Just sound ricocheting off walls that had no answer for me. Piper. Library, nothing. Piper. Top of the landing, nothing. Piper, answer me this instant. I came back down to the front hallway. The party had ceased to be a party. 50-some people stood arrested in that dreadful shared silence that precedes the moment when fear becomes undeniable. Somewhere near the kitchen, a voice was clipped and urgent on a phone. A woman I'd never seen before had both hands pressed flat against her mouth. I turned. Corinne was at the hallway's edge, arms folded loosely across her middle. The color had left her face entirely the particular gray of old wax. Every other woman in the room was visibly unraveling, trembling hands, breathing that came in stuttered pieces, the body caving under the weight of it. Corinne's hands did not move. My daughter looked at me from across that hallway, and what I saw shifting behind her eyes was not the terror of a mother who has lost track of her child. It was something else composed, arranged the kind of thing that wears grief the way a coat is worn, because it needs to be seen. I would spend the better part of the next 4 days arguing with myself that I'd read it wrong. I hadn't. I told myself her stillness meant shock. That fear lands differently in different people. Some shatter. Some go quiet as stone. It doesn't prove anything. I rehearsed that reasoning and then wheeled back toward the hallway and started giving orders. Clear the property. I said to Briggs, the broad-shouldered man who'd run security at the estate for 4 years. Everyone out. Now. He moved without a word. Within 10 minutes, the terrace had emptied, cars were threading out through the circular drive, and the jazz trio was breaking down their equipment with that careful, subdued efficiency of people who understand the evening is no longer theirs. I drew Garrett to one side at the bottom of the staircase. My son-in-law, 45 years old, a little silver collecting at his temples, a man I had long suspected of being better at, looking capable than at being, it was staring at his phone. When did you last see her? He looked up. Maybe 20 minutes before you started calling her name. She was somewhere around the dessert table, I think. Conrad, we should be... Who are you texting? He snapped his gaze to mine. Sorry. Your phone. It hasn't left your hand since the guests started going. I'm trying to reach Cora's sister. It's possible she brought Piper inside without mentioning it. Corinne doesn't have a sister. Garrett's mouth opened, then shut. Her cousin. I meant her cousin. He pushed the phone into his pocket. I can't think straight right now. I'm sorry. I let the silence sit for a moment. That stumble, the grab, and the recovery too smooth to be entirely innocent, I folded it carefully and stored it somewhere I wouldn't lose it. Briggs returned with the head of my security detail and walked me to the monitoring room off the kitchen, 4 screens, 8 angles. Every entrance, the driveway, the perimeter, fencing the side gates. Take me through the past 2 hours, I said. The lead Kepler, who'd come to me out of the state police, ran the footage back in deliberate steps. 63 guests through the front gate between 5 and 7. Caterers, the florists, the musicians. Each face on record, each vehicle accounted for. No one who wasn't cleared, Kepler said. Not a single unlogged entry. Departures, 14 left before 8. All verified. He paused, choosing his next words with care. Mr. Hartwell, there's nobody on these recordings who doesn't belong. The room seemed to contract. I set both palms on the console and held my attention on the screens. Keep going, I said. Earlier footage. I want anything unusual. A door held open an angle that moved anything out of the ordinary. I left him to it and returned to the main hall. Corinne was on the bottom stair, shoulders rolled forward, hands tucked between her knees. She raised her head at the sound of my footsteps. Dad! One-syllable voice splintering on it. The cameras? What did they find? Nothing yet? I lowered myself onto the step beside her. Corinne, I need you to think back over the last few weeks. Anyone who reached out and left you uneasy, a message, a call, someone paying more attention than they should have to Piper's schedule. Her head moved side to side, quick and certain. No, no one. Nothing. Her pickup from school, her activities, who beyond this family has that information? Dad, I can't say. You know how it spreads the other parents, her coach at the pool. She closed her fingers around my arm. We're wasting time. We should be calling the police right now. We will. Garrett appeared at the hallway entrance, voice strained. Every minute we sit here is a minute she's further away from us. I looked at him. His knuckles were white against the doorframe, his face carved into something that resembled anguish. But every few seconds his eyes dropped to his phone screen the way a man monitors a flight, not the way a father waits for word of his child. At 8:25, Corinne's phone rang. The sound cut through the house like something sharp. She yanked it from her pocket hands, trembling now, genuinely trembling, and turned the screen toward me. Unknown number. Video call. I answered it. Piper was on the screen. She was seated against a dark wall, wrists bound loosely in front of her with zip ties, eyes swollen and red. The room behind her was deliberately dim, a single lamp positioned to illuminate her face, and nothing beyond it. She was still wearing her yellow dress from the party. Grandpa, her voice came apart on the word. Grandpa, I want to come home. Everything in me seized throat, chest, hands, all of it locked at once. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Then the angle shifted and a voice came through, electronically distorted, scrubbed of anything recognizable, flat and low. It delivered 3 sentences, $250,000 wired within the hour, and you do not call the FBI. Then little Compass wants her grandfather. Don't make her wait. The call went dark. I stood holding Corinne's phone, looking at the black screen. Little Compass. A name I had given Piper when she was 4 years old, because she always seemed to know which direction led home. A name that had never passed my lips in front of anyone outside this family. Garrett moved immediately. Transfer the money, Conrad. Tonight, right now, whatever the number is. I need to call my attorney. No. He stepped toward me, his voice climbing. No attorneys, no calls. You heard what they said. If anyone else comes into this, she gets hurt. Do you hear that? Do you understand what they'll do? Lower your voice. Wire the money. The words came off the walls sharp and loud. What are you waiting for? She's 9 years old. She's sitting in the dark somewhere. She's 9 years old, and you're standing here thinking. I reached for my phone. Fletcher's number was already on the screen, my thumb over the call button. Then Corinne dropped to her knees in front of me. Dad! Her voice was raw, her eyes flooding. Please, please don't. They said if you bring anyone in, anyone at all, they'll hurt her. I can't. She covered her mouth with both hands, shoulders shaking. I can't lose her. Please just give them what they want. Please. I looked at my daughter on the marble floor of our family home. I looked at Fletcher's number on my screen. I thought of his voice from earlier that evening. If anyone puts paperwork in front of you tonight, walk away from it. Then I looked at Corinne's face, and I put the phone in my pocket and wired the money. I want to be honest about that because it was my decision, and I claim it entirely. I am not a man who frightens easily. 40 years of cold calculation under pressure will tell you that. But I am also a grandfather. And in that moment, with Corinne's voice shattering in front of me and Piper's face still sitting behind my eyes, every calculation I had ever made in a boardroom became beside the point. You cannot apply logic to the sound of your grandchild asking to come home. You simply cannot. I did not sleep. Corinne had gone to the guest suite sometime after midnight. I heard her on the stairs, slow steps. Uneven the gait of a woman carrying something she couldn't put down. I didn't call after her. There was nothing either of us could have said that would have made the next hour lighter. I sat in the armchair beside the bedroom window, phone face up on the armrest, watching the screen stay dark, willing it to move. Down the hall, the guest's suite light had been on since midnight. Through the wall, I could hear Garrett's voice, low, continuous, unbroken. Not the sound of a man wearing grooves in the floor with his fear. Not a father running through worst case after worst case until his mind gave out. It was the sound of someone working methodically through a list. Around 2 in the morning, I walked to the hallway and stood outside their door. The voice stopped. Corinne said something soft and brief, and then silence. I went back to my chair. By 6:30 Sunday morning, the house had gone pale gray with early light. I had made a pot of coffee I was barely touching when the front bell sounded. Vera Colfax, my house manager of 22 years, a composed and perceptive woman who had guided this estate through every hard season our family had passed through, answered the door and came to find me in the kitchen. "There's a woman at the entrance, sir," Vera said, her tone measured. "She says her name is Petra Selwyn. She says Corinne called her." I had never heard that name in my life. Petra Selwyn turned out to be a corporate attorney, impeccably put together, for 6:30 on a Sunday morning, which told me she had not been phoned this morning at all. She carried a leather portfolio which she set on my kitchen table with the unhurried ease of a woman who had placed things on other people's tables in other people's homes many times before. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, extending her hand, "I understand this is an extraordinarily painful situation. My purpose here is to help reach a resolution as efficiently as possible." "Corinne called you," I said, "when last night, after the initial contact. From what time?" A brief pause. "Around 9:00. Corinne had been on my staircase at 9:00, barely holding herself together. I watched Petra Selwyn open her portfolio and arrange 3 documents across my kitchen table with the brisk, tidy precision of someone laying down a hand of cards. "These are the instruments that will need to be executed to satisfy the conditions being set," she said. "The first is an emergency proxy. It authorizes a designated party to cast votes on your behalf at any board meeting convened in the next 90 days, should you be unable to attend. Standard language used routinely in medical circumstances." "This is not a medical circumstance," I said. She continued without pause. "The second is a merger consent form, a preliminary indication of your non-objection to a proposed acquisition discussion. It finalizes nothing. It simply opens the door." "Opens the door to what?" "And the third," she said, moving the final document forward, "is a temporary trust suspension, a 60-day pause on the charitable foundation's operational activities during a board restructuring, fully reversible." I looked at the 3 documents in a row across my kitchen table. Then I looked at Petra Selwyn. "You drafted all 3 of these this morning," I said. "I worked through the night." "No," I said. "You didn't." I picked up the emergency proxy and turned it over. The paper had that particular settled quality, the texture of something that had been printed and resting in a folder for considerably longer than a few hours. The ink on the signature lines was bone dry. These documents had been prepared before last night. Her expression held. "Mr. Hartwell, every hour that passes." "Get out of my house." "Sir, you're welcome to wait on the porch if you like," I said, "but you are finished presenting documents at my kitchen table." She gathered her portfolio with the same composed efficiency she'd brought through the door and left without another word. Vera closed the front door behind her and returned to the kitchen doorway, eyebrows raised. "Shall I make more coffee?" "Please," I said. I stood at the kitchen window watching the driveway until my phone moved. "Fletcher." I went out through the side door onto the stone porch, pulled it shut behind me, and picked up before the second ring. "I was going to call you at 7, Fletcher said. "Tell me about the filing. I've been up since 4. Fletcher listened carefully. His voice was level and precise, the same register he used when delivering verdicts he knew would land hard. "What happened last night? The video call, the wire transfer, the demands, the paperwork that materialized at my door before sunrise." "This is not a kidnapping," he said. I tightened my grip on the phone. "Fletcher, I mean that structurally. The documents Petra Selwyn is carrying, and yes, I know exactly who she is, were filed and formatted before Piper disappeared. The trust suspension language matches a draft I flagged on Thursday. Someone built the legal scaffolding for this transaction days in advance, then engineered a crisis to compel your signature. A pause. This is not a ransom situation, Conrad. This is a corporate acquisition built around a child. The words settled into my chest like stones dropped into still water, heavy, sinking, spreading outward in every direction. Give me 24 hours, I said. Conrad, 24 hours. Fletcher, hold off on everything. I put the phone away and remained on the cold stone porch a moment longer, the October air sitting raw and gray around me. When I went back inside through the side door, Corinne was waiting, arms crossed, positioned 3 feet back, her gaze moving straight from my eyes to the phone in my hand. Who were you talking to? I looked at her. This was my daughter, the one I'd driven home from the hospital the day she was born, steadied on a bicycle in this very driveway, watched over through 3 nights of fever when she was 7, and I'd been terrified of losing her. I stood there looking at her and thinking about those 3 documents on my kitchen table, the ones no one could have drafted in a single night. No one you need to worry about, I said, and moved past her into the house, understanding as I did that something permanent had just shifted between us. By early Sunday afternoon, Hartwell Estate had taken on the hushed, suspended quality of a house from which every outsider has been removed and which is now waiting. The caterers, the guests, the jazz trio, the florist, the whole careful apparatus of the evening before had been dismantled and hauled away, leaving nothing but family and the enormous, unspeakable thing pressing down on all of us. I sat in my study door, ajar, looking at a coffee cup I hadn't touched in an hour. The back garden was visible through the window the lawn piper had pulled me across the previous night, a few stray paper napkins still lying where the cleanup crew had overlooked them. One lifted and drifted on the October air. From the living room came the low-clipped sound of Corinne and Garrett, talking in measured fragments. I stopped trying to decipher them. Then Vera knocked. 22 years Vera Colfax had run this house. She'd been present when Cecilia was alive, when Corinne was a teenager, slamming doors when I came home from my bypass, barely able to manage the stairs. Every room, every cabinet, every drawer, she knew all of it. More than that, she noticed things that were wrong. She came in and shut the door behind her, not hard, but with a purpose, and placed her phone face up on my desk, displaying a frozen frame from the kidnapping video. "There's something I need you to see," she said. "Take a careful look before you respond." I moved forward in my chair. "Show me." She pointed to the lower left of the still image. Piper's shoulder, the fabric across it. That nightgown, the one with yellow flowers at the collar. "I see it. Corinne packed it for Piper when they spent the weekend at the lake house a fortnight ago." Her voice didn't waver, but her palms were pressed flat against the surface of the desk, the posture of someone holding themselves very carefully upright. I folded it and put it in the green duffel bag myself with Piper's other things. When they returned last Sunday, that bag came back home. The nightgown didn't. I told myself it had been forgotten. I straightened. "You're certain it's the same one?" "Mr. Hartwell, I have laundered this family's clothing for 22 years. I can identify every garment in this house." Her jaw set firm. "That nightgown never left the lake house, which means that video was filmed there." A chill climbed my spine from the bottom up. "There's more," Vera said. She advanced the frame slowly until the background resolved enough to reveal a shadowed corner, and across a chair behind Piper, the edge of a blanket. Faded blue, worn satin trim along one border. "That blanket." I studied it. "Cecilia's." "Yes." Her voice went quieter. "Mrs. Hartwell used it every winter for the better part of a decade. It lived in the cedar chest in the lake house master bedroom. I hand-washed it every year." She drew her chin up slightly, pressing her lips together. Someone who set up that room either knew the house intimately or they never left it. I got to my feet. The floor felt wrong beneath me, subtly tilted. "Vera, I need the access log for the Lakes house. Electronic records, every entry, every exit, the full past 30 days. "I can get that from the property management system immediately." She was already angling toward the door. "Quietly," I said. "Say nothing to Corinne." She gave one nod and was gone. I dialed Audrey Kinzer, my executive assistant, thorough and unsentimental. Late 30s, 6 years at Hartwell Meridian. with an almost preternatural facility for surfacing information that others had assumed was out of reach. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hartwell, I was about to call you." "Come to the house," I said. "Right now. Laptop with you. Don't tell anyone your destination." She was there within 40 minutes, machine already running when she settled at the study table. Compact, sharp-eyed reading glasses riding her forehead, wearing the faint, perpetual frown of a mind simultaneously tracking multiple threads. "The emergency proxy document," I said. "The one Petra Selwyn laid on my table this morning. Tell me what you found." Her fingers were already going. Same question occurred to me. I went into the system and found a copy. Petra's office sent it to our legal inbox last week. A draft supposedly for formatting review. She rotated the laptop. "Look at the file properties. Emergency proxy. Draft version 2. Created. Wednesday, October 9th, 17 p.m. 3 days before your birthday," Audrey said, her voice stripped flat. 3 days before Piper went missing. I read it twice. Then I crossed to the window. Outside, the paper napkin had caught against the garden wall and gone still. "Audrey," I kept my back to her, "among everyone who has worked at this company, how many would have the specific knowledge to draft that clause? The threshold language, the mechanism, the board notification window. Exact procedural detail." I could hear her working, cross-referencing, pulling personnel history, doing the thing she did better than anyone. Then silence. "Mr. Hartwell," measured, deliberate. "4 people in the company's history had a hand in drafting that clause. 2 have retired. 1 is currently on the board." A pause stretched out. "The 4th was let go roughly 10 years ago." I stayed at the window. The name she was about to speak was already sitting in my chest, waiting. An hour later, I arranged for Corinne and Garrett to go to the police liaison office. The formal missing persons report needed filing, and declining wasn't a credible option for them without raising questions. Their car hadn't fully cleared the gate before I was texting a number I'd committed to memory years back and never imagined deploying like this. "Library. 20 minutes. Leave your phone behind." Fletcher Dunbar was there in 19. The library at the eastern end of the hallway was the one room Corinne had always given a wide berth. "Too many books, not enough air," she used to say. That was precisely what recommended it. I shut us in. Fletcher settled opposite me, jacket-buttoned face composed into the exact concentrated stillness he brought to situations that demanded no margin for error. "What do you need?" "Federal," I said. "Not the emergency line, not a walk-in at the local field office. I need someone whose specialty is corporate extortion and who can move without generating records that Garrett might stumble across in our communications." Fletcher came forward, in his seat. "Miriam Sloan, Senior Agent, Connecticut Field Office Anti-Extortion Corporate Crimes. We've crossed paths professionally on 2 matters. Capable, discreet," and she grasps that the most lethal crimes frequently arrive dressed as contracts. He produced his personal phone, not the office one. "I'll get to her directly. Timeline. An hour if she's reachable." He was dialing before the sentence finished. "Conrad, while I handle this, your job is to perform." I held his gaze. "Perform. Corinne and Garrett cannot know you've made a move. In their minds, you're a shaken 73-year-old who transferred the money last night and is a single signature away from complying with whatever they ask next." His look was level, without any give. "Can you hold that?" "I've chaired board meetings for 40 years, I told him. "Controlling a room is what I do." Something close to a smile crossed his face. He turned and began speaking into the phone, voice low. I stepped out into the hallway and came within a step of colliding with Garrett. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee, the gesture calibrated to read as ordinary and considerate, though it had the feel of something rehearsed. He extended one toward me, his expression set to exhausted concern. "Thought you might want this." "Thank you." I accepted it, wrapped both hands around the mug, let a slight heaviness come into my shoulders, allowed a faint catch in my breathing, just enough. "Any news?" "Nothing yet." He shook his head, slow and mournful. "The detective from last night said they're following leads." He looked at me over the rim of his mug. "Conrad, those documents Petra brought this morning." "I overreacted," I said. "I was running on no sleep, and I took it out on her." Something moved in Garrett's eyes, a flash of relief, gone almost before it arrived. "Almost. She can come back whenever you're ready?" No pressure. We just want Piper home. Of course, I said. We all do. He turned and headed back toward the kitchen. I watched him go and drank a slow mouthful of coffee that registered as nothing at all. 30 minutes later, a text arrived from an unfamiliar number. Confirmed. Monitoring active. Do not change behavior. Fletcher appeared at the library doorway and gave me a single small nod. Miriam Sloane was in. That was when Declan Rourke called. Declan was my head of security ex-federal terse, and observant, the kind of man who cataloged everything and volunteered only what mattered. I had assumed he was sitting out a forced leave that had been arranged with suspicious convenience to put him off the property the night Piper vanished. He had not accepted that arrangement quietly. I know about the leave notice, he said. No introduction. I didn't request it. I've been in the system logs. The authorization email originated from an internal account, Mr. Stiles' credentials. I kept my voice flat. You're certain of that? I pulled the server timestamp and the device ID. It came off his work laptop sent at 11:43 a.m. on Friday. A beat. Mr. Hartwell, someone moved me off the board before the game started. Where are you now? Parked 2 blocks from the estate. I didn't want to come onto the property without your go-ahead. Drive up to the lake house, I said. Don't announce it. Don't log it. Keep it off the record entirely. I need eyes on that property. What's there now? What's been disturbed? Anything that doesn't fit. Understood. A pause. Sir, is Piper all right? My throat pulled tight. Not yet, I said, but she will be. I ended the call and stood in the hallway, the house silent around me. Garrett and Corinne somewhere in the back rooms. Fletcher running his quiet coordination with the FBI from the library. Declan already on the road heading north. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do was make sure no one saw my hands moving them. Then at 9:47 that evening, the block number that had sent the video came through again. Short and direct. Direct, 1 call, 30 seconds, no more. Be ready at 10 p.m. I read it 3 times. My heart drove hard against my chest, not from fear, but from a sudden, acute recognition that everything I had been building toward since the previous night had arrived. 30 seconds with Piper. I didn't need 30 seconds to tell her I loved her. She already knew. What I needed was 30 seconds to ask her a single specific question, one she and I both understood, with an answer that would tell me precisely where she was. I tucked the phone into my shirt pocket directly over my heart and waited. 9:58 p.m. I sat in the armchair at the study window, phone on my knee face up, watching the seconds pass. The house had gone into its nighttime stillness, not the natural kind, but the kind that feels held in place by effort. Every creak the old floorboards gave sounded twice as loud in the absence of everything else. Corinne was in the hallway. I could hear her pacing short, controlled passes back and forth across the hardwood, the sound of someone burning off fear she couldn't afford to show. Garrett had taken up position at the kitchen table with a glass of water. He wasn't drinking, his phone angled in front of him so he could monitor the screen without appearing to. I was watching all of it and none of it. What I was actually doing was remembering a Tuesday afternoon in early spring 4 years ago when Piper was 5. We'd lost our way on a trail in the nature preserve behind the property. Nothing alarming, just enough trees that the house had disappeared from view, and Piper had taken my hand and announced, with the full assurance of someone who had checked twice and had no doubts that she knew the way out. How do you know? I'd asked. She pointed without a moment's pause. Because the compass in my chest always points home, Grandpa. You just have to be quiet enough to feel it. I had laughed. I had told her she had a gift. And from that afternoon, Little Compass had been her name between us. The name that meant she was the one who always found the way back. She still thought of it as our private game. That was the only reason what I was about to try had any chance at all. At 10 under exactly, the phone rang. I picked up before the second pulse. The distorted voice was immediate, flat, transactional. 30 seconds starting now. Then Piper's voice came through, and something in my chest lurched so sharply I had to press my free hand against my sternum. Grandpa. Her voice was thin, worn down at the edges, the particular sound of a child who has been crying a long time and has temporarily gone quiet. Grandpa, are you there? I'm here, sweetheart. I held my voice steady and warm, the voice I used when she woke, frightened in the night. I'm right here. Are you hurt? No. A small, unsteady breath. I'm not hurt, but I want to come home. I want to come home right now. I don't like it here anymore. It's cold and it smells strange, and the man won't tell me when you're coming. Her voice buckled on the last words and spilled into a fresh round of quiet, exhausted crying that nearly took me apart. My eyes burned. My jaw held itself in place by force. I know, I said. I know, baby. I'm coming for you. I promise I am coming. I let one beat pass. Just one. Hey, do you remember our game? A small hesitation. The compass game. Tell me, where does the compass point when you dream? A longer pause. I heard her breathe. Something shifted in the background, a chair, maybe someone repositioning nearby. And then, barely above a whisper, almost swallowed by the distortion, Lake House. The line went dead. I sat with a silent phone in a room that felt like the walls had drawn in several feet. 2 words. That was everything. 2 words from a 9-year-old who thought she was playing their old game with her grandfather, with no idea she had just delivered the single piece of information I had spent the last 24 hours trying to locate. I wanted to come apart. I wanted to cover my face with both hands and shake with the simultaneous force of relief and terror. Instead, I set the phone on the armrest with care and breathed 4 counts. In 4 counts out the rhythm the cardiologist had prescribed after my bypass. Then Corinne came through the door. She had stopped pacing. Her face was chalky eyes, red-rimmed and glassy, and she moved toward me with her arms wrapped tight around her own ribs, bracing herself from the inside. Is she okay? The voice came out cracked and fast. What did she say? Did they give any indication, a timeline, anything about when they'd... She sounded frightened, I said. That's all. Corinne's voice climbed raw and fraying. 30 seconds, and that's what you have. Did she say where she was? Anything about who was there, what the place looked like? She said she wasn't hurt. I held Corinne's gaze directly. She said she was cold. Corinne pressed her fingers hard over her mouth. Her shoulders shook once one violent tremor, and her eyes spilled over. God, she whispered. God, she must be so frightened. I sat and watched my daughter cry. I watched the way the tears arrived. Genuine. No question about that. And I watched the way her eyes, even through the tears, kept moving, tracking, working something through. The grief was real. The crying was real. But running beneath it all, threaded through every expression like wire through cloth, was something that had no business appearing on the face of a mother who did not know where her child was. It was the faint, involuntary tension of someone listening for confirmation that a plan remains intact. Dad, Garrett filled the doorway, voice drawn tight. Did she give any hint of location? Anything we can use? Nothing useful, I said. Something crossed Garrett's face too quickly to name. His jaw moved. He looked at Corinne and then back at me, then gave a slow nod. Okay. We just stay with it, do what they're asking. Keep calm. Keep cooperating. He paused. Conrad, I really think you should reconsider those documents. Not tonight, Garrett. I stood up. My legs held, which I was grateful for. I'm going to bed. We'll sort this out tomorrow. I moved past both of them, down the hallway, up the stairs, and into my room. I lowered myself onto the edge of the mattress in the dark and drove the heels of my hands into my eyes until the heat behind them faded. She had said, Lake House. Declan was already there. At 11:58, my phone pulsed on the nightstand. A message through Declan's encrypted channel. 7 words. I'm at the lake house. You need to see what's here. I stood in my locked bathroom with the tap running cover noise in case someone in the corridor was alert to the sound of a screen waking in the dark and read those words 4 times over. Then I dialed him back on the secure line. He picked up before the second ring. Voice controlled, unhurried. I'm in the back bedroom. You need to hear all of this. Go ahead, I said. The room from the video. I've located it. North-facing second-floor blue curtains. He shifted as he spoke. 3 depressions in the floorboards where a tripod stood, standard configuration for video capture, angled to catch that far corner against the dark wall. Whoever positioned it understood framing. This wasn't improvised. My grip went tight on the phone. Keep going. Beside the radiator, zip ties. 2 of them cut clean through, not pulled apart, severed with a blade. 1 pair was child-sized, right there next to the heat source. A pause. When he resumed, something had changed in his delivery, a controlled professional surface beginning to crack. There's a small white sneaker beneath the bed frame. Left foot size 3. Someone drew a little star on the toe in purple marker. My throat sealed over. Piper had drawn that star herself the week before school started. She'd brought her foot up at the breakfast table and rotated it carefully so I could take in the artwork from every direction, beaming. "Declan," my voice came out scrape bare. "Is she there? Any trace of her still in the building? I've worked through every room, every closet and crawl space, the boathouse, the detached garage." Then a silence that was heavy with what he owed it. "She isn't here, Mr. Hartwell. Somebody moved her. The bedding had been used. She was in that room within the last 24 hours, based on what I'm looking at. She was here. She isn't now." My legs gave up the argument. I dropped onto the rim of the tub, the cold of the tiles seeping through my shirt. "There's something else," Declan said. "Brace yourself. Tell me." Next to the sneaker, there's a folded piece of paper doubled over the way children fold things. I opened it. He paused, and I could hear him drawing a quiet breath. It's a crayon drawing. A house, some trees, what appears to be a lake. At the bottom block, letters the careful, deliberate print of a child who wants to be understood. His voice fell. "Grandpa, find me." What came out of me then had no name. It was something that predates language, a thing that had been lodged in the middle of my chest since Saturday night, growing denser with every hour until it forced its way out as a single short, fractured exhale. She'd sat in that cold room in a house she believed was familiar ground, and she had waited. She had trusted me to come. "Photograph everything I said when I could speak. Preserve the scene. Don't disturb anything further. The FBI gets all of it untouched. Already handled. Transmitting now." A beat. Mr. Hartwell, whoever held her in that room, the evidence points to someone staying with her. Second coffee cup in the kitchen. Two distinct sets of footprints on the dock, an adult alongside her. And that person, whoever they were, he weighed his phrasing, left her shoes with her, gave her drawing materials. The bedroom door was never locked. I pressed my palm flat against the cold tile. "You're saying whoever was with her had some kind of line they wouldn't cross. I'm saying she had company, and she wasn't mistreated. Not under this roof. What came after they relocated her that I can't tell you. Head back to the car," I said. "I want you moving toward the city. Coordinates from Miriam's team will reach you when they have them." "Understood." The line went dead. I remained on the bathtub edge in that locked room for a long stretch of time I couldn't accurately measure. The tap kept running. The mirror had gone white with steam. Somewhere beyond my reach, my granddaughter had taken a crayon in hand and spelled out my name with the kind of faith that has no doubts in it at all. I unlocked the door, crossed back into the bedroom. Through the wall came the sound of movement in the hallway, Garrett up early or perhaps never having gone to sleep. I went to the door and eased it open an inch. He stood at the far end of the corridor, back toward me, phone pressed to his ear. From 15 feet, I could read his posture. Shoulders locked, free hand, working through his hair in short, agitated passes. Whatever was coming through that line, it wasn't what he'd been expecting. I watched the news move through him, watched the tension migrate from his neck and shoulders down the full length of his body. Then he brought the phone down and turned part way, and I drew back from the gap, but held my position, still watching. Garrett looked at his screen. In the thin gray wash of early morning, his face had drained completely. His hand trembled. Not theater, not a performance, but the genuine involuntary shake of a man whose entire structure has just been yanked from beneath him. He read the screen again, then once more. Then he set the phone face down on the hall table, with deliberate, almost delicate care, the gesture of someone who needs a breath before confronting what a thing means. I'd caught 3 words on the screen in the instant before it flipped over. The performance is over. There are moments when a room doesn't just fall silent, it empties as though something has extracted the breathable air entirely and packed the space with something denser. Something that bears down on your eardrums until every ordinary noise becomes outsized and strange. The hum of the refrigerator, the kitchen clock marking off seconds, the scrape of a chair leg against tile. That was Monday morning in the kitchen of Hartwell Estate. I came down at 7:15. Garrett was already seated at the table, both hands encircling a coffee mug, eyes fixed on the surface the way a man stares at an image he cannot will away. He registered my footsteps and raised his head. Whatever face he was assembling for me steady concerned the careful projection of a father. In anguish, he ran out of time to finish it. I crossed to the table. I set my phone down, screen up those 3 words sharp in the notification banner. "The performance is over. Who sent you that, Garrett?" In roughly 2 seconds, his expression passed through 5 distinct states. A denial formed, rose part way, then buckled. His jaw worked open, then shut. His hands locked around the mug so hard the knuckles whitened, and then all of it left him at once like a load-bearing wall, giving way somewhere inside. "It's not what you think," he said. His voice had thinned to almost nothing, no trace of the measured, even tone I'd been tracking. Through walls, for 2 days. Things escalated beyond what anyone planned. I swear to you. Conrad, no one, not a single person involved, meant for Piper to actually be at risk. That was never... Who sent the message? I held my voice flat. Steady. The way I had learned to hold it across 40 years of boardrooms, when I needed a man across the table to understand that I had no intention of repeating myself. Garrett shoved back from the table and got to his feet. Too abruptly, the chair barking across the tile, one hand mashed against his brow. "We calculated a few days. That was the full extent of it. A few days you sign the documents. We return her. Everything finds its way back to... Back to what, exactly? Back to you occupying a chair at my table in my house, explaining to me what my own company is worth, while quietly piling up debts I was never told about, and leveraging positions you never legitimately held." He recoiled as though I'd reached across the table and hit him. His chin shook. Actually shook, this 45-year-old man in my kitchen, the scaffolding of every lie he'd constructed and maintained, over 4 years now visible in the simple fact that he could no longer govern his own face. "I needed more time," he said, voice fracturing. "Just enough time to correct it. The investments collapsed on me. The margins disappeared. If Hartwell Meridian had restructured along the lines I proposed 2 years ago, none of this would have come to this. You used my granddaughter." The words landed quieter than I'd anticipated, quieter and with more weight behind them. "You used a 9-year-old child to extort me." Garrett pressed both hands over his face and produced a sound I had no category for. Not quite weeping, not quite something else either. Broken and raw and unmistakably real. That was when Corinne came through the kitchen doorway. She had heard everything. I could see it in the way her body stopped, the instant she crossed the threshold. Feet planted shoulders, drawing inward eyes, moving from Garrett's shaking frame to my face and then back again. She was still wearing what she'd had on the day before. Her hair was uncombed, and behind the fear in her eyes, behind the careful calculation I'd been reading for 2 days, something new had taken up residence, the look of a woman who has just watched the last barrier collapse. "Dad," the single syllable fractured in her throat. She took a step toward me, one hand extended. "Dad, please, just hear me out. I'm listening," I said. "I've been listening for 2 days." She drove her fingers hard against her lips. Her whole body trembled with the work of keeping herself upright, and then she stopped trying, and simply came apart. The tears fell fast, her shoulders heaving, one hand seizing the edge of the kitchen counter, as though it were the only fixed point left in the world. "We only wanted your signature." She managed, her voice breaking between sobs. "Just the papers, just enough to hold on to what's ours. I know how that sounds. I know. But we were losing everything. Garrett's accounts were frozen. The creditors were... Dad, I was terrified. I was so terrified. And I thought if you'd just sign, we could put it right. We could fix all of it, and nobody would ever need to know." "Do you remember Sunday morning," I asked, "when you came and asked me who I'd been on the phone with?" She looked at me. Something shifted behind her eyes. "I told you nobody important," I said. That was the moment I decided this was going to end on my terms. Not Garrett's terms, not Harlan's, mine. I held her gaze. "You raised your daughter to believe she was doing something noble, that she was helping hold her family together. She carried out that role for weeks, and never once wavered. She showed more loyalty than any of us had any right to expect." Corinne covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders shook, not for effect this time, just breaking. "Where is she, Corinne?" My voice stayed low. "Where is Piper right now?" The sobbing hitched, stopped almost. Something passed through her expression, something sharp and cold cutting through the grief. When she spoke, her voice had changed. Smaller. "I don't know," she whispered. "That's the truth. I genuinely don't know. It was supposed to be the lake house only a few days. We had someone with her. She wasn't meant to leave that house before you signed." "She's not at the lake house," I said. Corinne's legs buckled. She caught herself on the counter, knuckles draining white, all color gone from her face. "What do you mean she's not there?" "She's gone, Corinne. Someone moved her. Someone you and Garrett let into this situation, gave access to your daughter, and apparently had no leverage over once other money entered the picture. Garrett made another sound from behind his hands. Corinne stared at me, her eyes wide and glassy and flooding with a fear that was finally entirely real. Her performance was done too. I found myself thinking about what I needed to believe had happened in the days before this about Corinne, alone in some room holding a photograph of Piper, as an infant hands unsteady, telling herself it was temporary. Just a few days. She'll be fine. I wanted to believe she had said that to herself. I wanted to believe there had been a moment, some flicker of maternal instinct breaking through the desperation when she had looked at her daughter's face and felt something true. Maybe she had. I would never know with certainty. What I knew was the scene directly in front of me. My daughter crumpling against a kitchen counter, my son-in-law with his face buried in his hands, and a 9-year-old girl somewhere beyond my reach still waiting. My phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. The voice on the other end was calm and unhurried, carrying the particular polished smoothness of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the consequences always landed on someone else. Mr. Hartwell, he said, my name is Harlan Voss. I believe it's time we had a direct conversation. I was through the side door and out onto the stone porch before Harlan Voss had finished his opening line. The October morning hit me like a cold gray sky leaves down the faint smell of rain somewhere beyond the tree line. I pulled the door shut and kept my voice entirely even. Mr. Voss, I said, I've been expecting your call. A brief pause, just long enough to tell me he hadn't anticipated that. Then you're better informed than your son-in-law would have preferred. Garrett has never been especially careful about covering his tracks. What do you want? What I've always wanted. His voice settled back into its polished register, measured, deliberate. Hartwell Meridian. The full acquisition. A merger approval signed, notarized, witnessed, on camera, which, as you understand, renders it effectively unassailable under Delaware corporate law. No board petition, no shareholder challenge, no morning after second thought that any judge will take seriously. I want to be precise about what a notarized camera witness merger approval actually means, because Harlan was depending on me to feel the full weight of it. In the United States, when a document is executed before a notary public and recorded on video, it creates a legal record of the signer's identity, physical presence, and apparent willingness. It does not foreclose a legal challenge, but it raises the threshold for one considerably. Harlan wanted that threshold as high as he could push it. He wanted my signature to appear to any court that later examined it as the free voluntary act of a man in complete command of his faculties. He wanted me to hand over my life's work and look as though I'd done so gladly. And in exchange, I said, the girl comes home the moment the ink dries, safe unharmed, delivered to whatever address you designate within 2 hours of confirmation. I rested my back against the stone railing and looked out over the rear lawn, the same stretch of grass where Piper had led me by the hand 2 nights ago. The paper napkin had caught against the garden wall, darkening with morning damp. And if I don't, I said. 3 seconds of silence, exactly 3 counted deliberate. I've never had occasion to answer that question twice, Harlan said. The call ended. I stood on the porch and let the cold work its way into my jacket. A man with less composure or more fear might have felt the walls contracting around him. What I felt instead was something settling into place deep in my chest, the way a key finds the tumblers in a lock that has resisted too long. Everything that had been fractured and uncertain across the past 48 hours suddenly resolved into something sharp. Harlan Voss was a serious man. His firm Voss Capital Group had spent 3 years circling Hartwell Meridian the way a patient predator circles something it has already decided to take. I knew his record, aggressive, systematic, legally sophisticated. He did not move without architecture behind him, and that was precisely the problem. Because the architecture of what had been constructed here, the legal documents prepared well in advance, the deliberate exploitation of the emergency voting clause, the precise sequencing of financial pressure against emotional leverage, that was not Harlan Voss's method. Harlan built things. He obtained what he wanted by engineering irresistible terms, by eliminating alternatives one at a time until agreement felt like the only rational path. The use of a child was not a business instrument. It was a personal one. It required someone who understood that I could not be budged by financial threat, by reputational risk, by anything directed at the company, or my standing, or my own safety. It required someone who had shared a conference table with me for 15 years, and learned slowly and with great care the single thing in the world capable of making Conrad Hartwell abandon every principle he had ever held. Someone who actually knew me. I went back inside, walked straight past Corinne and Garrett without a glance at either of them, and dialed Audrey from the hallway. She picked up immediately. Audrey, I said, keeping my voice low, I need a complete profile. Aldous Fenn, former Chief Risk Officer, Hartwell Meridian, terminated approximately 10 years ago. Every company he's been connected to since, every board position, every advisory role, every LLC, every holding entity, every name he's appeared alongside in any filing anywhere in the country. I need it within the hour. Audrey's keyboard was already in motion. Is this connected to everything? It's connected to everything. What I was about to learn about how far the people closest to me were truly willing to go was the kind of thing that changes the shape of every memory you thought you understood. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved had been quietly working against you for years, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait until every piece of proof was in your hands? Call me the moment you have it. I slid the phone into my jacket pocket and stood in the hallway. The house was quiet behind me, except for the muffled sound of Corinne weeping in the kitchen and Garrett's low, fractured voice attempting something that had long since run out of meaning. Aldous Fenn, I had brought him on 22 years ago from a white shoe firm in Philadelphia. What drew me was the precision of his mind and the quietness of his ambition. For 15 years, he had been the second voice in every consequential decision Hartwell Meridian ever made. He understood our legal architecture the way a surgeon understands the body, our vulnerabilities, our trust instruments, our board relationships, our shareholder agreements. He knew me. I had let him go 10 years ago over a risk assessment. He had manipulated figures to make a failing acquisition appear viable in a deal where, as I later discovered, he held a personal financial stake. I had handled it without fanfare, a severance package, a sealed agreement. No public exposure, no litigation. I had been merciful. I was beginning to grasp what that mercy had cost. 53 minutes later, Audrey called back. Her voice carried that particular carefulness that means the information is significant. I have the file, she said. Mr. Hartwell, the first holding company on the list, the primary vehicle through which Aldous Fenn has been operating over the last 4 years. What is it? A brief pause. It's a subsidiary of Voss Capital Group. I settled onto the bottom step of the staircase. Not because my legs failed me, but because the mind sometimes requires the body to go still before it can absorb what it has just been handed. Aldous hadn't gone to work for my enemy. Aldous had built my enemy. By Monday afternoon, the kitchen had been surrendered to the sound of Corinne weeping somewhere in the guest suite, and Garrett doing whatever Garrett does when there is nothing left to manage. Pacing in all likelihood. Drinking water he didn't need rehearsing explanations no one was going to accept. I had withdrawn to my study with Audrey's file and a cup of coffee that went cold before I remembered it was there. The 51-page folder on Aldous Fenn. I spread across the desk the way you lay out a map when you need to understand how far you've drifted from where you intended to be. The years following his departure had not been quiet ones. 4 shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada within 18 months of leaving Hartwell Meridian. A consulting practice with no public clients. A seat on the advisory board of a mid-size acquisition firm in Richmond that had since been folded into something larger. And threading through every entity like a spine at the center of it all, a holding company called Ridgeline Partners, established 8 years ago, capitalized quietly and efficiently through a series of transfers that would require a forensic accountant 3 weeks to fully trace. Ridgeline Partners held a 51% stake in the early-stage investment vehicle that had seeded Voss Capital Group. I sat with that for a long time. Audrey appeared in the doorway, laptop under her arm, reading glasses pushed to the top of her head. She had plainly not stopped working since my call that morning. I went further, she said, setting the laptop on the corner of my desk without waiting to be invited. Petra Selwyn, you asked me to run her background when she appeared Sunday morning. I finished it an hour ago. Tell me. She passed the bar in Connecticut, spent 4 years at a firm called Clearpoint Legal Strategies. Different name from your company, different spelling. Audrey turned the laptop to face me. The founding partner of Clearpoint Legal Strategies is listed as one Frederick Dunmore. Frederick Dunmore is the brother-in-law of Aldous Fenn, I said. Audrey nodded, jaw tight. Petra Selwyn worked directly under that firm for 3 years before going independent. She drafted trust instruments, corporate proxies, emergency voting amendments. She tapped the screen. The same language that appears in your emergency proxy document appears in 2 other instruments she filed during that period. She did not write those documents on Saturday night. She has been writing versions of them for years. I leaned back in my chair, pressed both palms flat on the desk, and looked at the ceiling for a moment because I needed somewhere to put the full dimension of what I was now understanding. Aldous had not simply engineered a hostile acquisition. He had spent a decade constructing the conditions for one. Every entity, every attorney, every legal instrument had been assembled and positioned like pieces on a board, waiting for the precise moment when the right pressure could be applied to the right person. That person was me. That pressure was Piper. "Audrey," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Is there anyone in this picture, anyone in Aldous' network, anyone adjacent to Harlan's organization who might have cause to want this whole thing to fail?" She frowned and thought carefully. "That's an interesting question." She scrolled through the file. "Harlan Voss has a son, Wyatt, 28 years old, listed as a junior associate at Voss Capital Group. Very little on him publicly. He keeps a low profile." She paused. "I did find one thing, a charitable donation made 2 years ago in the name of a foundation called the Hazel Voss Memorial Fund. Hazel Voss, Harlan's daughter. She passed away 6 years ago at age 8. The air in the room changed. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated on the desk. A message from Declan's encrypted line. I opened it. A set of GPS coordinates, and below them 4 words. "She is here. Hurry." The coordinates resolved to the Bridgeport waterfront in Connecticut, a working port district commercial warehouse's minimal residential presence, roughly 40 miles from where I sat. I called Declan immediately. He picked up on the second ring. "Did you send this?" I said. "No." His voice was sharp and focused. "That came through my old personal email and address I stopped using 3 years ago. Whoever sent it knew where to find a channel that wouldn't be watched by anyone inside Harlan's operation. A beat. It's not a trap, Mr. Hartwell. The metadata on the file is clean. Sent from a public Wi-Fi network in Fairfield, Connecticut, 40 minutes ago through a throwaway account created this morning. Whoever did this knew exactly which lines inside Harlan's organization were being monitored, and they went around all of them. Fairfield. I thought of Wyatt Voss, 28 years old, keeping a low profile. Someone inside Harlan's organization who does not want this to go any further. "That's my rate as well," Declan said. "What do you want me to do?" "Forward those coordinates to Miriam Sloan. Tell her we have a possible location and need verification before anyone moves. And Declan, whoever sent this. Don't expose them. Not yet." "Understood." I ended the call and sat a moment longer with Audrey's file in front of me. A 9-year-old girl named Hazel Voss who had died 6 years ago at age 8, and her brother who had just sent me the coordinates of a warehouse in Bridgeport. I did not fully understand it then. I would not understand it completely until much later when someone who knew Wyatt Voss told me about the year after Hazel died, about how he had sat at his father's boardroom table at 22 years old and watched Harlan Voss immerse himself in acquisition strategies and expansion models and quarterly projections, building an empire over the memory of a little girl, rather than sitting with the weight of losing her. Some things, regardless of who you are, what your name can command, you simply cannot do. You can. At 5 o'clock precisely, my phone rang. I knew the number. Colette Granger, Hartwell Meridian's Director of Public Relations. A sharp, unflappable woman who had managed the company's external communications for 11 years and had never once called me on a personal line without a reason that warranted it. "Colette," I said. "Mr. Hartwell." Her voice was low and measured the voice of someone speaking in a building where she was not entirely certain who might be within earshot. "I'm sorry to reach you this way, but there's something you need to know," and it came directly to my desk. "Go ahead." "An hour ago I received a press release draft from Corinne's office. Formatted, finalized, ready for distribution." She paused. "The headline reads, 'Conrad Hartwell steps down Hartwell Meridian, announces new leadership transition, effective immediately. It's timed for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Embargo lift at market open.'" My hand tightened on the phone until I felt the casing flex. "She wrote it before Piper came home," Colette said, and her voice dropped further, weighted with something that sounded almost like grief. "I don't know what's happening inside your family right now, sir, but I believed you needed to know." You were right to call, I said. Don't distribute anything. Don't respond to her office. And Colette, this conversation didn't happen. Yes, sir. I set the phone down on the desk. The study window held nothing but fading light, that particular pewter and gold dimming that only a Connecticut autumn produces at the end of a day. Somewhere across 40 miles of highway and a waterfront warehouse I'd never had reason to visit my granddaughter was waiting for me to arrive. And just down the corridor in the guest suite, my daughter had already written the press release that would end my tenure. I said to Vera that I needed an hour of air. I left the destination unspoken, partly because I hadn't fully settled on one myself. What I needed wasn't a place, it was movement. The sensation of the car pushing forward, of being in transit rather than trapped inside walls that had grown suffocating over 4 days. My hands carried me there without consulting my mind, following a route worn into muscle memory from 11 years of Sunday mornings. 20 minutes later, I was parked in the small gravel lot beside St. Crispin's, an unassuming white steeple church tucked into a residential block of Saugatuck that Cecilia had adored precisely because it asked nothing of you. She used to say it was the only institution in all of Westport County with no interest in impressing anyone the Almighty included. We had worshipped here every Sunday for 11 years until her health made that impossible. The interior lights were being extinguished one by one as I stepped out. I rapped on the side entrance. Father Donahue Ware answered personally, a slender man with white hair, late 60s, reading glasses halfway down his nose, a corduroy jacket that had seen considerably better decades. 20 years as pastor of this church. He had stood at the lectern and delivered Cecilia's eulogy. Not once in 2 decades had he said a word to me that he did not fully mean. He studied my face for half a second, then swung the door open. "Come in," he said. "I'll put the kettle on." I told him I didn't want tea, that I needed, and then my voice quit on me without warning. I swallowed it back down. "What I need," I said, "is to ask you something about Piper." He became perfectly still. The reading glasses came off. He folded them into his jacket pocket with great care. His next words arrived, quietly measured. "How long has she been gone?" "Since Saturday night." A long exhale through his nose. He turned without a word and gestured for me to follow. He brought me to the cramped office behind the vestry bookshelves, packed with worn Bibles, the desk lost under layers of parish notices, a telephone on the wall that looked like a relic of 1993. He slid open the top drawer and retrieved a secondary cell phone, its screen protector webbed with cracks, protected by a rubber bumper case. "Backup device," he said. "I've left the voicemails on it intact." With methodical fingers, he unlocked it, found the saved messages, and extended it toward me. "About 4 weeks back, a Thursday evening, I nearly rang you the same night. Talked myself out of it, decided I was being dramatic." He paused. "I've thought about that decision every day since Saturday." I accepted the phone. I hit play. Her voice came out of that small speaker and went straight through me. Young and clear and wholly serious, the voice she used when something had lodged in her mind and genuinely wouldn't let go. "Father Donahue, it's Piper. I have a question. Mommy says that sometimes we have to pretend things so that people we love will understand what matters. Like, as she called it, a surprise game. And I've been doing the game for a few weeks now, and I think it's almost over. But I wanted to ask you something." Her breath audible and small. "If I pretend long enough, will Grandpa forgive Mommy?" The message ended. 8 o'clock on a Monday night, standing in a vestry office holding a borrowed phone, and something that had been compressed inside my chest for 4 straight days, compressed until it had no further room to compress. Released itself through my throat as something that was not quite a sound. My eyes went hot. My airway narrowed to almost nothing. I found the edge of Father Donahue's desk with my free hand, because the floor had shifted slightly, and I required something anchored. She had no idea, I said when I could form words. She believed she was doing something for her mother. That's what I understood, too. His voice had roughened. He shook his head slowly, lips pressed. That child carried the weight of that question for weeks. Conrad entirely on her own, without troubling a single person with it. He reached over and took the phone from my grip. "I ought to have called you. I am genuinely sorry." "You had no way of knowing what you were looking at," I said. My voice by this point was no longer fully under my management. I faced the window and spent a moment just breathing. A 9-year-old had been handed a role and told it was an act of love. She had performed it without flinching, without complaint, because she was certain she was rescuing her family from something terrible. She had telephoned a priest to ask whether her faithfulness would be enough to secure her mother's pardon. I spent 10 more minutes with Father Donahue, thanked him, walked out to the car. I sat without turning the ignition and dialed a number retrieved that afternoon from Hartwell Meridian's old personnel files. Clem Hartley picked up on the third ring, warmth in her voice, and beneath it caution. The unmistakable register of a woman who had been dismissed without adequate explanation and was still trying to make sense of why. "Miss Hartley," I said. "Conrad Hartwell, Piper's grandfather." A sharp breath. "Mr. Hartwell is Piper?" "All right. I've been seeing the alerts, and I wasn't sure whether I should—" "She will be," I told her with more conviction than I actually possessed. "The reason I'm calling is that I need to hear in your own account what happened in the days before you were let go 3 weeks ago." A short pause dense with things unsaid. "Mrs. Stiles told me the position was being restructured." Clem said, choosing her words. "But that wasn't it? 2 days before I got my notice, Piper mentioned something while we were doing her homework together. A game her mother had introduced her to. She called it the secret game. She said she was helping with something that mattered." Clem's voice softened. She looked proud, Mr. Hartwell, the way children look when they believe they're being genuinely brave. I pressed my hand flat against the steering wheel and held it there. I tried asking her about it carefully so she wouldn't feel questioned. Clem went on. I wanted to understand whether something was off. She pulled back and said she'd probably said too much already, that it was supposed to be a surprise. 48 hours later, Mrs. Stiles phoned to say my services weren't required anymore. Her voice went taut. "Mr. Hartwell, I've been asking myself ever since whether I should have done more. I didn't know how to step into another family's business without—" "You did nothing wrong," I said. "This doesn't belong to you." I ended the call and stayed in that dark parking lot outside St. Crispin's until the cold began pressing through the car windows. The church had gone entirely dark behind me. The street was motionless and silent. What Corinne had constructed here was architectural in its deliberateness. She had coached a child, then removed the one witness who'd gotten close enough to notice. She had drafted a leadership transition announcement before her own daughter was back under a safe roof. What made it cruel was not the ambition. I had spent a career surrounded by ambition. What made it cruel was the instrument she had chosen, a child who loved her without qualification, who had asked a man of God whether her performance would purchase her mother's redemption. My phone vibrated on the console. "Fletcher by text. FBI briefing at 11. Miriam Sloan wants to move tomorrow night." I read it twice. Started the engine. The Hartwell Estate driveway received me at 10:51 p.m. The house sat dark, but for the porch light and the narrow amber glow, Vera kept burning in the front entry hall, her long-standing signal to whoever returned last that the household had not forgotten them. I remained in the car a moment, hands on the wheel, listening to the engine cool. The kitchen was empty, the guest suite silent. The whole structure of the house seemed to be withholding its breath. On my study desk, Vera had left tea chamomile in the green and white cup Cecilia had always preferred resting on its dedicated wooden coaster. 22 years of quietly reading a room before anyone in it recognized what it lacked. I pulled the chair out and sat, wrapped both hands around the cup, looked at the left-hand drawer. 3 years since I had opened it, not from forgetting, from knowing precisely what was inside and understanding that I was not yet equal to it. I set the cup down, opened the drawer. Cecilia's letter sat where it had always been folded into a plain white envelope, my name across the front, in her script. The blue ink gone slightly pale at the edges from 3 years in the dark. She had given it to Fletcher a week before she died, with instructions to deliver it after the funeral. I had placed it here that same evening and made a private promise to myself that I would read it when I had the strength for it. I had never had the strength. I opened it now. The letter opened with that particular give of paper, long handled gently and then put away. Cecilia's handwriting ran across both sides in her close, deliberate script, the way she wrote when the subject demanded precision. The house came first. Ordinary details, logistical concerns. Her method for approaching anything hard was always the same orbit, it before landing. Then I was the subject. 3 years gone, and I still had to set the page down for a moment, because her voice moved through those words with such fidelity. It was almost physical, as though she had simply stepped into the room and taken the chair across from mine. Then came Corinne. I have loved that girl every day of her life, and I will go to my grave loving her. But I have also watched her since she was 12 years old, and I have seen something in her eyes that frightens me. Not cruelty. I want to be clear about that. Not cruelty. Ambition uncoupled from conscience. The belief that wanting something badly enough makes the wanting righteous. Heat gathered behind my eyes. I kept going. I have prayed for 20 years that I was wrong, that what I saw was nothing more than the edge of a young woman carving a path through a world that punishes women for softness. Maybe that's all it was. I hope that's all it was. But if the day ever comes, and I pray it never does, when someone uses a child to break you, when the thing you love most becomes the lever someone uses against everything you've built, save the child. First, Conrad. Save the child first. The legacy will take care of itself. I restored the folds and held it between both palms for a long beat. My eyes were wet. I made no effort to conceal that. The study was empty, and Cecilia had always held that tears were not weakness. They were the body's unguarded accounting of what the mind could not contain. She had known. Not the particulars, those she couldn't have anticipated, but she had read something in her daughter's character, some contour of what was coming, and she had committed it to paper and sealed it away, because she could not bear to be misremembered as oblivious. At 11:00 exactly, my phone rang. Secure line. I picked up. Miriam Sloane's voice came through clipped, and even the cadence of someone who had been running on no sleep long enough that composure had become automatic. Road noise rode faintly beneath her words. Mr. Hartwell, I have 6 agents staged within half a mile of the Bridgeport coordinates. Eyes on the warehouse since 9:00 p.m. A brief pause. One male subject inside mid-30s, intermittent movement. No threatening conduct noted. Second subject remains in a parked vehicle outside, engine off. Hasn't gone near the building, Piper, I said. Any signed thermal reads 2 heat signatures in the warehouse. One adult one significantly smaller. The smaller one is stationary, but registering movement. Her tone didn't change exactly, but something underneath it did a barely perceptible shift in register. She's in there, Mr. Hartwell. On her feet, moving. I put my free hand flat against the desk and let out a breath I seemed to have been holding for the better part of several hours. 5 a.m. is when we go, Miriam said. Port District is quiet at that hour, civilian exposure minimal. But there's one thing I need before we can move. Probable cause is strong, but any federal judge will require a device link, something that ties one of the subjects physically to the conspiracy, a document they accessed, a message they took in, anything that anchors their hardware to the extortion scheme. She let that sit a moment. Do you have anything that fits? Fletcher, who had occupied the chair across from me for the past 40 minutes, reached into the brown leather case at his side and laid a manila folder on the desk between us. One tap with 2 fingers. Tell her. Yes, he said quietly. We have something, I said to Miriam. A document package, structured to pass as the merger approval. They've been pressing me for same format, same language, same legal architecture, but threaded through with an embedded tracker and a set of identifying markers that capture device data the instant the attached file is opened. Miriam took a moment. How did this get assembled? My attorney built the outer document. The forensic tracking element came from your office's digital contact. Fletcher made that connection this afternoon. I glanced at Fletcher, who returned a single nod. Authorization was airtight. All of it falls within the warrant scope you established tonight. Good. That package needs to reach them before 4:00 a.m., Miriam said. Can you deliver? Yes, I said. Consider it done. When the line went quiet, Fletcher and I remained in the study, facing each other across the stillness. Vera's chamomile sat forgotten and cold on the corner of the desk. Cecilia's letter was still in my grip. Where are you right now? Fletcher asked. He rarely asked things like that. When he did, it meant something. Running uphill for 4 days straight, I said, but I think I can see the crest. He gave one nod, then reached for his case and got to his feet. Back here at 3:30. Sleep, if there's any to be had. I didn't believe there would be, but I lifted the pen from the desk and put my signature to the cover sheet of the false package, the mark that would make it convincing enough to draw someone in. Then I sent Declan a message through the encrypted channel. Get the package into Boyd Lassiter's vehicle. Passenger seat. Our source confirmed the window was left open. Tonight, this ends. I set the phone aside and spent one more moment with Cecilia's letter. Then I creased it back along its lines, returned it to the envelope, and slid it into my jacket pocket rather than the desk drawer. I wanted it on me this time. The car service left Fletcher and me on the pavement outside a 54th Street address in downtown Hartford at 8:15. Tuesday morning, 40 stories of glass and steel, the kind of tower that lodged a dozen law firms, in an ever-changing inventory of neutral conference suites that corporate attorneys booked by the hour for the simple reason that no one could claim the space as home ground. Harlan Voss had picked, deliberately, credit where it was due. I had put on the navy suit, the one Cecilia had always said made me look like someone who had already won the argument before sitting down. My watch stayed home. Inside a room engineered to signal my vulnerability, I was not going to hand them a single detail to interpret. Fletcher carried the brown leather case, the false document package inside it tracker, live the trap set into every page formatted with the same precision as the merger approval Petra Selwyn had been pushing me toward since Sunday morning. The elevator brought us to the first floor. A receptionist walked us along a carpeted corridor and into a corner room, walled in glass from floor to ceiling, the view stretching out across downtown Hartford. The Hudson lay like a gray stroke in the distance. Harlan Voss sat already at the head of the table. I had studied his image before press materials, conference panels, the curated public face of a man who treated his own visibility as an instrument. In person, he was raunchier than those pictures allowed somewhere in the early 50s, carrying that specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have disciplined themselves over many years to reveal nothing involuntary. Rising when we came in could have been manners or performance. With a man like Harlan, there was no meaningful difference. Mr. Hartwell. "Thank you for making the time," he said. My options were limited. I replied pleasantly enough and took the seat across from him, no handshake offered or expected. That was when I noticed the man at the window, back to the room, gaze on the skyline, hands laced behind him. He turned when my voice reached him, and something cold moved through me, that precise, unwelcome jolt of recognizing a face your memory had filed under finished business. Aldous Fenn had aged. 10 years will do that. The dark brown hair was silver now, nearly throughout trimmed closer than he'd worn it before. The intervening decade had left its record on his face, but the eyes had not changed at all, that same calibrated measuring quality I had observed across the Hartwell Meridian board table. Through 100 sessions, the look of someone perpetually running the fourth and fifth move, while everyone else was still on the second. He held my gaze, and the edge of his mouth drew up, not a smile exactly, more the acknowledgement of an equation that had just resolved. "You look good for a man who's losing everything, Conrad," he said. My jaw set hard. Under the table, my hands pressed flat to my thighs. 10 years away, and that was how he chose to come back through the door. The tone was breezy, almost fond, as though we were picking up where we'd left off, rather than meeting again after I'd ended his career, with a severance envelope and a non-disclosure agreement in a room deliberately chosen for its lack of windows. Aldous Wise said, keeping the steadiness in my voice. "I've been wondering how long before you'd step out from behind Harlan's stationery." He crossed to the table without invitation and settled into the chair next to Harlan. No glance for permission, no pause. The unhurried confidence of a man who had already decided the room was his. I was never hiding. "You just weren't ready to look." "I underestimated you," I said. "I won't make that mistake again." Something lit briefly behind his eyes. Not quite satisfaction, but close enough to it. Being taken seriously had always been the thing that animated him most. "You were always better at building than at protecting what you built. That was your limitation, not mine." Harlan produced a tight, controlled cough, the kind a man makes when he has agreed to share a platform and wishes he hadn't. "Gentlemen, we're here for a document, not a reunion." I turned to Harlan. "You want the merger approval? I want the company," Harlan said simply. "The merger approval is the mechanism. Sign it, have it notarized." He gestured to the room's far corner, where a notary public waited with a stamp and the carefully vacant expression of a professional witness. A camera mounted on a small tripod, angled deliberately toward the signing table. "And your granddaughter's in a car on her way home within the hour. That's a clean offer," I said. "It's the only offer," Harlan said. My gaze moved to Aldous. You trained me, I said. 15 years of it. You also drilled into me that you never put your name on anything in a room you don't own. Aldous tilted back in his chair, arms folding across his chest, chin rising just slightly. And yet, here you are. You built an empire, he said, his voice descending into that register he reserved for moments when he needed you. To mistake calculation for sincerity, quieter, almost gentle. 40 years of work, Conrad, and you chose to deed it over to a charitable fund named for a woman 3 years in the ground. I moved it towards someone who would actually put it, to use someone who would make it grow. You should be thanking me. What rose in me wasn't heat, it was cold. The variety that never reaches the voice or the face, that instead takes up residence in the hands and the jaw and goes very still. You weaponized a 9-year-old girl, I said. My own granddaughter. It was your idea, wasn't it? Harlan doesn't think that way on his own. That came from you. One muscle in Aldous' jaw moved. Once only. Business requires leverage, he said. She is 9 years old, I said. She wrote a note from that room asking her grandfather to come for her. The effort required to keep my voice level, registered in my throat and deep in my sternum at the same moment. No leverage formula in existence justifies that. None. Fletcher placed the document package on the table before me. I lifted it, held it a moment, then slid it across to Harlan. Fine, I said. Here's your signature. Harlan's hand moved for it at once. Petra Selwyn, positioned to his left, drew it toward herself first, then raised her laptop lid and moved through the pages, with the clipped, surgical attention of someone who had written a considerable portion of that language herself and understood exactly where to look. On the final page, she found an attached digital file, formatted as a verification document and labeled as a supporting exhibit. She opened it. I reached for my water glass and drank from it slowly, deliberately. The tracker was live. Somewhere inside the FBI field office in Lower Connecticut, a device was capturing an IP address, a machine ID, and a timestamp, all of it destined for a federal judge's desk within the hour. Aldous had his eyes on my face the whole time. He had always possessed that talent, reading the small signals, the invisible ones. He had spent a career at it. You're not nervous, he said. Something had shifted in his voice. Quieter now, more measured. No, I said, I'm not. There are hours of the night that time seems to simply stop accounting for, not the easy dark of sleep, not the purposeful dark of work, but that suspended hollow. Dark, the kind that belongs entirely to waiting for an outcome you have no power to hurry. Sitting in a car that carried the smell of cold coffee and worn leather eyes, fixed on a warehouse door that hadn't moved in 40 minutes. Every minute that passed between 2 summer a.m. and 5 summer a.m. on the morning of Wednesday, October 16th, felt pulled thin like something stretched almost to transparency. Since 1:30, I had been in the passenger seat of Declan's car 2 blocks off the Bridgeport waterfront, on a service road behind a line of commercial storage units. Fletcher was behind me in the back seat. We hadn't exchanged a word in 20 minutes. The radio balanced on my knee was tuned to Miriam's frequency volume, set low enough to stay between the three of us. At 2:47, her voice broke through. Hartwell, you copy. I pressed transmit. Copy. Go ahead. Tracker confirmed. The document was accessed on a device tied to a prepaid account, but the machine ID corresponds to a laptop we've had flagged, in connection with Harlan Voss's operation for the past 8 months. That's our device link. A short pause. Federal judge signed the warrant 11 minutes ago. We're green. From the back seat, Fletcher let out a breath, long and slow, the kind that had been stored up since yesterday morning. What's the status inside? I asked. One heat signature holding stationary in the northeast corner of the main floor. Small, child-sized. Miriam's voice was measured and unhurried, though. After 3 days, I had learned to detect the discipline running beneath it. One adult moving at intervals nearby. Second adult stationed outside at the south vehicle entrance. No movement in the past 40 minutes. That's Traeger. Traeger. The name had come to me through Boyd Lassiter's file, assembled by Miriam's team. Mid-level inside Harlan's structure. No kidnapping history. His function was logistics transportation. The particular kind of man who never categorized himself as dangerous, because nothing he'd been handed before had ever demanded enough of him to feel that way. Until now. There's a complication, Miriam said. A message to Traeger's phone was intercepted at 0200. Encrypted text, but we got through it. Traeger has been directed to move the child to a second location at 600. Transfer to an outside party. My fingers closed tighter around the radio. Who? Nobody with a leniency file, she said. Not someone who's been parked in a warehouse for 4 days reconsidering things. A pause. We move at 500. That leaves us an hour before Traeger's transfer window opens. I want to be at the entry point, I said. Absolutely not. Miriam, Mr. Hartwell. Her voice went sharp. I have 6 agents and a tactical coordinator on this. There is no place in a federal extraction for a 73-year-old civilian. She knows my voice. I said it plainly, no softening. If she comes awake in that room and sees strangers pushing through the door, she'll panic. She'll struggle. She'll be loud. Noise at 500 in a port warehouse is a risk none of us can afford. My voice didn't waver. Just my voice from outside. I won't need to step inside. It's enough to reach her. She'll settle. Silence held on the line. Then Miriam said, You stay at the vehicle perimeter. You do not cross the threshold under any circumstances. If I tell you to get back in the car, you get back in the car. Agreed, I said. Fletcher shifted forward from the back seat and put his hand on my shoulder. Conrad. The roughness in his voice was something I hadn't heard from him before. Bring her home. At 3:15, one of Miriam's surveillance agents posted at a narrow, west-facing window on the warehouse's upper level, radioed in a description of what lay on the other side. Through the radio, I built the picture in stages the way a person assembles a room they've never entered from someone else's account of it. Piper was asleep on a folded tarp in the northeast corner. An adult-sized jacket had been laid across her shoulders and chest, covering her the way a blanket would. Her hair had come loose, tangled around her face. Her knees were drawn in tight against her body the way she always curled when cold had gotten into her. I had watched her sleep that way in the back seats of cars on long drives years ago. Boyd Lassiter sat on a crate 4 feet away. He wasn't watching the door. He was watching her. Motionless, the agent said, elbows resting on his knees, head angled slightly down. He had held that position for more than an hour. I turned that over in my mind for quite some time. A man who had agreed to participate in the taking of a child, sitting alone in the dark, watching a 9-year-old sleep. Not because guarding her was the task, but because he couldn't quite make himself turn away. I didn't forgive him for it, but I came to understand something about him in that moment that would matter to me later. At 4:45, the team moved into position. I stepped out of Declan's car and walked to the edge of the perimeter barrier, a chain-link fence at the corner of the service road, roughly 60 ft from the warehouse's east entrance. An agent in a dark jacket raised his hand as I reached the fence. This is as far as you go, sir, I know, I said. I stood there at that fence radio in my right hand, the October pre-dawn chill, pressing through my jacket, and waited. The port sat quiet around me, a distant foghorn somewhere out on the water, the low creak of rigging, the smell of diesel and salt air. Above the sky held the deep blue-black of an hour before first light. At 5:17, a voice on the radio said, In position, standby. At 5:19, a second voice. South entrance clear. Traeger is moving toward the vehicle. At 5:20, I heard Traeger shout from somewhere inside the building. Not a word, just a sound. The raw, guttural burst of a man who turns a corner and finds what he least expected. Then rapid footsteps. Then something metal hitting the floor hard. Then Miriam's voice, controlled and absolute. Go! The next 4 minutes and 31 seconds were the longest of my life. I know the exact duration because I had one hand clenched around the chain link and my eyes fixed on the second hand of a clock mounted on the service building across the road. I needed something concrete to hold against the sounds coming through the radio and the images my mind kept assembling and tearing apart every few seconds. Traeger shouting, then agents' voices stacking over each other, clipped and deliberate, the compressed language of trained people holding to a plan. A door thrown hard against its frame. Running steps on concrete, then Miriam. Subject 1 down. Subject 2 compliant. Then silence. 8 seconds of silence that felt like falling through something with no bottom. Then an unfamiliar voice, one of the entry agents, speaking carefully into his radio. We have the child. She's awake. She's very frightened. And then I heard Piper. Not words. Just a sound. A high, raw, broken sound, the kind children produce when they have held themselves together, past the point of bearing it, and something finally gives. A sound I hadn't heard from her since she was 4 years old, and came off her bicycle in the driveway, lying on the pavement in stunned silence before the reality of it broke over her all at once. My legs were moving before I'd made any decision to move them. The agent at the perimeter fence stepped into my path. Young, solidly built, hand raised. "Sir, I cannot let you—" She needs to hear my voice. The words came out rougher than I intended. "Please, just let me talk to her." He looked at me the way people look when they're measuring whether what's in front of them has changed the rules enough to matter. Then he reached for his radio. Agent Sloan, the grandfather, is requesting radio contact with the child. A beat, then Miriam's voice, slightly short of breath. "Put him on." He handed me the radio. I pressed the transmit button with a hand that had at last begun to shake. "Little compass," I said. "Grandpa's here." "1 second. 2. The radio carried the warehouse's ambient sounds, voices, movement, the creak of the structure around them. Then Grandpa. Small, cracked, unmistakably hers. "Right here, sweetheart." My throat was closing and I'd let it because there was no one watching and no reason left to hold anything back. "I'm right outside. I'm coming to you right now." "You came." Her voice broke on the second word, climbing back into that high fractured register. "Grandpa, you came. I wrote you a note. I didn't know if you'd find it." "I found it," I said, and my voice broke too. Completely right down the middle. "I found it, baby. I'm coming." Miriam's voice. "Bring him in?" The agent opened the perimeter gate. I walked across 60 ft of gravel and concrete in the gray pre-dawn light and in through the east entrance of a warehouse smelling of salt water and rust. A small figure in an oversized dark jacket came running across the floor toward me with everything her 9-year-old legs could give. Piper hit me somewhere around the midsection, both arms locking around my waist, her face driven into my jacket, and the force of it nearly took me back a step. I caught her bent low over her and wrapped both arms around her and held on with the particular desperate grip of a man who has been reaching for something across 4 days and has finally closed his hand around it. She was shaking, her whole body trembling, fine, continuous, the trembling of someone who has been cold and frightened for a very long time. Her hair was tangled against my chin. She smelled of dust, old canvas, and something faintly sweet, like the granola bars Vera always kept in the kitchen drawer. "I've got you," I said into the top of her head. My eyes were burning, and I made no effort to stop them. "I've got you. You're safe. I've got you." "I wrote your name?" she said, voice muffled against my jacket, the words surfacing between ragged, hiccuping sobs. "On the paper, I thought, if I wrote it, maybe you'd know to look." I knew I said. "I always knew Little Compass. I was always coming." She cried harder. I held her tighter. Somewhere to my left, Miriam Sloane stood with arms crossed, watching with an expression that was professionally neutral, except around the eyes. Boyd Lassiter sat against the far wall, wrists zip-tied in front of him, a federal agent standing over him. He wasn't watching the agents. He was watching Piper, and his face exhausted, hollowed out, carrying something that had no tidy name, was the face of a man attempting to reckon with a debt he had no idea how to pay. As I straightened up, with Piper still pressed against my side, I felt something drop against my foot. I looked down. A piece of paper folded twice and slightly crumpled had slipped from the pocket of the oversized jacket she wore. It landed face up on the concrete floor. 4 words in crayon, in the careful block printing of a child determined to be understood. "Grandpa, find me." I picked it up with my free hand and stood there in a warehouse in Bridgeport at 5:24 in the morning, and for a moment I could not speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because some things are too complete to need words. Declan appeared at the entrance behind me. He looked at Piper, then at me, and his jaw tightened. He gave one nod, the nod of someone who has seen the mission through to the thing that mattered most. The EMTs were outside with a stretcher and a blanket, and Miriam steered us gently toward the exit, with a hand that was more human than official. Piper would not release my hand, not even for the 30 seconds it took to get her onto the gurney, and I sat beside her in the ambulance with her fingers locked around 2 of mine, her eyes tracing the ceiling of the vehicle as it pulled away from the port. Through the window, the sky was beginning to change, the first thin gray of dawn, lifting over the water, spreading slowly like something being carefully brought to light. Piper stared upward for a long time. Her breathing was steadying. The shaking had mostly stopped. The blanket was pulled up to her chin. Then in a voice so quiet I had to lean down to catch it, she asked, "Is Mommy coming?" I looked at her face, this small, trusting face that had carried a secret, written a note, and waited in the dark with absolute faith that I would find her. My chest ached with an intensity that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the answer I could not find the words for. Westport Medical Center smelled the way all hospitals smell antiseptic and recycled air and the particular institutional quiet of a place that has learned not to react to anything too quickly. I sat in a plastic chair in the corridor outside the pediatric examination suite and looked at my hands. They lay on my knees, trembling faintly, a fine, involuntary vibration I hadn't noticed until Vera settled beside me and placed her hand over mine. The contrast between her steadiness and my shaking made it impossible to look away from. "She's going to be all right," Vera said. Not a question. A statement the kind you make when the room needs to accept something is settled. "I know," I said. It came out hoarser than I'd meant it to. "I know she is." Vera left her hand right where it was. 22 years, and that woman had never once misjudged what a moment called for. Additional words would have been an intrusion. She offered none. She held her ground beside me, solid and still, while the examination continued on the other side of the door, and the corridor went on being a corridor, ordinary, indifferent, entirely unaware of what the preceding 4 days had been. The pediatric attending stepped out 12 minutes later. She was unhurried, precise, the kind of physician who has learned that what families need in these moments is accuracy, not comfort. "No physical injuries," she told me. "Mild dehydration, some fatigue. Vitals entirely within normal range. There will be emotional recovery ahead. She'll need professional support for that. But nothing she's carrying is beyond healing." Her eyes met mine directly. "She asked for you each time I looked in on her. Your name every single time before anything else." I pressed my lips shut and gave a single nod. "Can I go in?" "5 more minutes." I lowered myself back into the chair. Vera pressed my hand once and let go. I drew out my phone. 8:47 in the morning. Somewhere across the city, in a federal building in Lower Connecticut, Boyd Lassiter was sitting in an interview room and deciding how much of the truth to give them. Miriam called at 9:12. He talked. She said no lead-in, no framing, no counsel present, no bargaining. He requested to make a statement, and then delivered one. I got up and moved to the far end of the corridor, out of the flow of people. "Tell me. I want to read you his exact words." A short rustle of paper. Then Miriam's voice in the measured, uninflected register of someone transmitting information without coloring it. He said, and I'm quoting, "Garrett Stiles funded the first video and arranged the initial setup at the Lake House property. Harlan Voss's organization handled the secondary location and all the logistics around the transfer. Petra Selwyn constructed the legal documents. She understood precisely what she was building and had assembled variations of it before. And Aldous Fenn, a pause. Aldous Fenn wanted Conrad Hartwell broken. Not outmaneuvered, not pressured broken. He said specifically that the girl was the only lever that would do it. The walls of the corridor seemed to close inward. I pressed one palm flat against the surface beside me. Boyd said that. My voice dropped. He offered all of it without prompting, Miriam said. He also supplied corroborating specifics. The timeline, the chain of communications, the financial transfers out of Garrett's account. Set against the tracker evidence and the metadata Audrey Kinzer documented, we have more than sufficient probable cause. A beat. Arrest warrants cleared 40 minutes ago. Garrett Stiles, Harlan Voss, Aldous Fenn, Petra Selwyn. All 4 either in custody already or being taken in as we speak. I shut my eyes for 3 seconds. 40 years of construction. 4 days of watching it nearly come apart at the hands of people I had extended trust to. And here I stood in a hospital corridor, palm against the wall. It was finished. "Thank you, Miriam," I said. "Thank your attorney and whoever transmitted that GPS coordinate." A short pause, and something briefly human surfaced in her tone. "Go see your granddaughter, Mr. Hartwell." I ended the call. The phone buzzed almost at once. "Fletcher." "It's done," he said. 2 words only, delivered in the voice of a man who had gone 36 hours without sleep and was finally setting the weight down. "It's done," I said back. "Go be with her," Fletcher said. "Everything else holds until Monday." I slid the phone away and stood there in that corridor, turning Aldous Fenn over in my mind. 15 years across a conference table from each other. 15 years of trust extended to a man I had taken in genuine good faith to be my nearest professional ally, possibly something closer than that. and beneath the surface of all of it, building quietly for years before I caught the first trace, a structure of resentment and accumulated injury, the kind a proud man swallows, rather than speaks, and in swallowing never disposes of. I had offered him a graceful departure. I had shown restraint where I might have shown force, and he had spent that decade of restraint, engineering what would eventually be leveled at a 9-year-old child. I could not make sense of it. I doubted I ever would. The doctor opened the suite door and tilted her head toward the room. I went in. Piper was upright on the examination table in a hospital gown, hair still knotted and loose around her face, a cup of orange juice held in both hands, drinking it with the deliberate focus of someone who has gone a long time without enough water. She raised her eyes when I entered, and the whole shape of her face reorganized. Not the raw release of the warehouse, something steadier than that, something that would last longer. The expression of a child confirming that what she chose to believe turned out to be real. Grandpa, both arms came up, juice cup still clasped in one hand. I went to her and pulled her close, with care keeping track of the monitoring leads, still running down her arm, and she turned her face into my shoulder and produced a sound, somewhere between a laugh and the tail end of a cry she hadn't quite finished. "You still smell the same?" she said, voice muffled against my jacket. Something came out of me, a short, rough laugh that I hadn't prepared for at all. "Is that good?" "It's really good," she said firmly. That evening I drove to the Westport Police Department satellite facility where Corinne was being held for voluntary questioning ahead of formal arraignment. I gave the duty officer my name. He placed a call. 3 minutes passed, and then I was walked to a waiting area outside the interview wing. Corinne occupied a plastic chair against the far wall. Beside her sat her attorney, a man I'd never laid eyes on before, briefcase open across his knees, talking to her in a low voice. She looked up the moment I came through the door, and her lawyer's sentence died in the middle of it. I took the chair directly opposite her. Above us, the fluorescent lights gave their flat, steady hum. The room held the odor of overworked coffee and carpet shampooed too many times over too many years. Leaving the hospital, Fletcher had sent me a single text. "Corinne retained counsel at 4:00 p.m. Name is Philip Corbin, Criminal Defense, Hartford." I'd read it, tucked the phone away, and walked on. Her right to representation was not in question. I was relieved she had exercised it. What followed would now at least exist somewhere on a record. For the first time in 4 days, my daughter and I occupied the same space with nothing standing between our lines of sight. The waiting area of the Westport Police Department satellite facility offered 12 plastic chairs, a corner vending machine with 4 varieties of bad coffee, and the kind of fluorescent overhead light that makes every face look convalescent. The carpet ran to a shade of institutional gray, almost certainly selected for its ability to absorb evidence of anything. I recognized the quality of this room. I had sat in one very much like it before. Corinne had been 15 years old, white-hot with anger at a classmate who had said something vicious about Cecilia's illness, and the resulting altercation was severe enough that the school brought in the police. I drove to the station and walked into a room that could have been this one, and I found my daughter in a plastic chair, split lip arms, folded tight jaw, set at the angle she used when she had made peace with whatever consequences were coming, and had no plans to apologize for getting there. I sat beside her and asked, "Are you hurt?" She told me she'd had it coming. I took her home regardless. That was always what happened. I took her home. Tonight I sat across from her instead, not adjacent. Across. The gap between those two positions resists measurement in feet. Corinne's attorney began to push himself up. "Mr. Hartwell, I would advise—" "Give us a few minutes," I said. He looked to Corinne. She answered with a curt, minimal nod, and he eased back into his chair, carrying the composed blankness of a man professionally trained to absorb whatever a room throws at him. He pulled a folder open and directed his eyes to it, with the attentiveness of someone catching every syllable. Corinne looked at me. The area beneath her eyes had gone the swollen, purple-tinged color that follows days without sleep. Her hair was drawn back, and that stopped me, because Corinne had never once stepped out in public without her hair arranged. It was among the small, careful fortifications she had maintained her whole adult life. Absent it, she read as younger. For a moment I could see the face she'd had before the wanting had finished reshaping it. "I don't know how to start," she said. "Then don't," I said. Just answer what I ask." She closed her lips against each other. Her hands lay in her lap, working quietly one against the other, a habit that had been with her since she was 7 years old. Did Piper know she was in danger? Corinne's jaw tightened. Her eyes went glassy. She wasn't supposed to be. "That's not what I asked." "Dad, did she know?" I said it carefully. "At any point across those 4 days, did she understand that the people around her meant her harm?" Corinne's chin dropped to her chest. Her shoulders shook once hard. When she raised her eyes again, they were streaming. "No," her voice gave out. She pressed the back of her hand firmly against her mouth and gathered herself with visible effort. She believed it was temporary. She thought she was helping. I told her it was a surprise, that if she stayed quiet for a few days, everything could be put right and the family would be fine. "You told a 9-year-old girl," I said, "that this family's survival hinged on what she did." Corinne flinched as though something had connected. "That's not... That is precisely what you did." My voice was not raised. It had gone to a register that only becomes available when a thing is past the point of anger. She left a voicemail for Father Donahue asking whether pretending long enough would make me forgive you. She pressed my name onto a scrap of paper inside a warehouse and left it somewhere I might find it, because some part of her had already grasped that whatever was happening had stopped being a game, even if she lacked the words for it. I leaned forward slightly. "She was 9 years old, Corinne. 9 years old, and she was trying to rescue you." Corinne came apart entirely. The sound she made had nothing graceful in it. It was the heaving, raw collapse of someone whose last internal defenses have given out all at once, shoulders folding inward, face disappearing into her hands. The specific ugly grief of a person who can find no angle from which to justify or reduce or explain what they are looking at. Her attorney shifted in his chair and said nothing. I sat and waited. I did not move toward her. I waited because the full weight of it needed to land on her, and also because I was uncertain whether, if I reached out, I would be doing it for her benefit or for my own need, to go on believing she was still the person I had spent a lifetime trying to see her as. When the weeping had pulled back enough for speech, she lifted her head. Her eyes were raw, red-edged, every trace of mascara gone. The composed professional surface had been stripped entirely away. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "I swear to you, I didn't know Harlan would. I didn't know Aldous was part of it. I didn't know it would end up." "But you opened the door," I said. She went completely still. "You unlocked the door and admitted people you had no control over to accomplish something you wanted badly enough to put your own daughter in the middle of it." I rose from the chair slowly. "That is the truth of what happened, Corinne. That is what this was." She came out of her chair and caught my hand in both of hers, fingers clamping down with the grip of someone who has run out of other things to hold on to. Her whole frame was shaking. "Dad, please, please don't." Her voice climbed and fractured. "Please don't leave this room and not come back. Please, I know what I did. I know, but please don't." I looked down at her hands around mine. These hands. I had held them in the delivery room the day she was born. Had held them at crosswalks when she was small. Had held them at her mother's funeral 3 years ago while she shook with a grief that had seemed at the time like the most genuine thing in her. I thought of Piper's hand in mine. 6 hours earlier, small and steady in the back of an ambulance. I spent 40 years building something, I said. My voice had gone very quiet. I built it intending to leave it to you when the time came. Not out of tradition, not out of expectation, but because I believed you were capable of carrying it with the same values I had tried to bring to it. I felt Corinne's grip tighten, her breath moving in jagged pulls. "And you spent 1 week dismantling everything I had believed about you, including your daughter's trust, in the one person in the world whose entire obligation was to protect her above everything else." I freed my hand from hers gently but completely. "I will make sure you have the best legal representation available," I said. "I will see to it that you are treated fairly at every stage of this process." I looked at her face, my daughter's face still so familiar, still carrying traces of the girl I had loved without qualification for 42 years. "But I cannot give you more than that. Not right now. I'm sorry." Corinne pressed both hands across her mouth. Her legs gave, and she dropped back into the plastic chair. Shoulders heaving and the sound of her crying followed me out the door and along the hallway and through the building entrance until the heavy glass sealed behind me and the night air absorbed it. I stood on the pavement outside the police facility. Above Westport, the sky was a flat, starless October black clouds, in from the coast, low and featureless, erasing everything above the roofline. The street was deserted apart from a cab idling at the corner and the remote sound of a freight train somewhere to the east. I stood there for a considerable time, breathing the cold in and out and asking nothing more of it than that. Then I called Vera. "Is Piper still awake?" I asked. Vera's voice came back warm and immediate. "She's been asking for you every 20 minutes since they brought her home. I kept waiting to call until it seemed like you were ready." Something loosened in my chest, gradually, the way a rope that has been pulled wet and taut for days will finally ease when the tension is released. "I'm on my way," I said. January comes to Connecticut without any particular announcement. No dramatic threshold, no unmistakable shift. Just a morning when you step out the door and realize the cold has gone from provisional to permanent. The trees stripped in a way that no longer reads as transitional, and the sky settled into that flat, specific white, belonging to a season that has committed fully to itself. I drove to the Hartwell Meridian offices on a Tuesday morning in early January 2024, the car heater running Cecilia's letter, folded in my inside jacket pocket, where it had ridden every day since October. The building presented itself differently than it had across 40 years. Not vacant, the staff occupied their desks. The phones were active, and the quarterly figures Fletcher had been shepherding through the transition period were holding steady. But a place mid-transformation carries its own atmosphere. The way a house reads differently once you have made a decision about it, and before that decision has been executed. Audrey was waiting in the conference room on the 32nd floor, 3 document stacks arranged with her characteristic exactness. A pen placed at the precise center of the first page. 6 years together, and she had never once presented anything out of sequence. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," she said. "Everything's ready." Fletcher was already in his seat jacket, on reading glasses in place, a coffee in front of him. He had probably been working on for an hour. He looked up when I entered. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready?" I said, and I meant it in a way I hadn't meant a single word since October. I sat down and took up the pen. The first document was the majority stake transfer. 63% of Hartwell Meridian Group's founding shares, redirected to the Cecilia Hartwell Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to educational access programs throughout the Northeast. It was what I had announced at the start of the prior year. It was what someone had moved to stop me from doing. No one was stopping me now. "This makes the foundation the controlling shareholder," Fletcher said as my pen reached the signature line. "The board structure ensures no single individual can reverse this transfer without a supermajority vote. It's as permanent as anything legal can be." "Good," I said and signed. Audrey moved to the second stack without a word. The second document was the Piper Styles Irrevocable Trust, a protected financial structure, holding a designated portion of my personal assets for Piper's education housing and long-term security, with me named as sole trustee until she turned 25. Under American trust law, an irrevocable trust cannot be undone by anyone, including its creator. Whatever the courts produced over the months ahead, whatever Corinne's criminal proceedings determined, whatever family court eventually formalized this portion of Piper's future, sat beyond the reach of all of it. "Temporary legal guardianship runs concurrent with this," Fletcher said with care. "Family court signed the order in December. You are Piper's primary guardian, legally and formally, until the court reaches a determination on parental rights following Corinne's proceedings." He paused. "Corinne's trial date is confirmed for March?" "I know," I said. I signed the second document. Audrey gathered both executed sets, organized them into their folders, with quiet efficiency, and slid one copy of each across the table toward me. Then she looked up, not in the practiced way of a professional, but with the directness of someone acknowledging something that sits well outside the boundaries of work. "It was an honor to be part of this, Mr. Hartwell," she said. "What you built and what you chose to protect." I held her gaze across the table. "Thank you, Audrey, for everything that happened in October." "All of it." She gave a single nod, pressed her lips briefly together in the manner of someone who has resolved not to cry in a conference room, and turned back to gathering her materials with considerable focus. I stood, took Fletcher's hand, and held it a beat longer than occasion normally calls for. 18 years a great many difficult rooms. He nodded, and I collected my copies and walked out. The house in Saugatuck was not the estate. Cecilia and I had discussed going back to it for years, the two-story colonial, on the tree-lined street, white clapboard green shutters, the kitchen window that held the afternoon light, the porch that had belonged entirely to the two of us. In the early years before everything grew large and complicated, we simply ran out of time to do it together. I had gone back without her. It wasn't the same thing, but it wasn't nothing either. Vera had the house warm when I came through the door that afternoon, something in the oven, her answer to most circumstances requiring steadiness. The low winter light was moving through this kitchen window at that particular January angle, the one that briefly turns an ordinary room gold before the sun slides below the tree line. Piper was at the kitchen table. She was bent over a large sheet of paper crayons, fanned out in a semicircle around her tongue, just visible between her teeth, the expression she wore when something had her full attention. She looked up when she caught the sound of my footsteps, and something in her face settled into place. Not the raw release of the warehouse, not the quiet relief of the hospital. Something more considered than either the look of someone confirming that what they had chosen to believe remains true. Grandpa. She lifted her crayon in the direction of the chair next to her. Come look. I set my briefcase down, shed my coat, and sat beside her. She turned the paper to face me. A house 2 stories. A porch, a tree in the yard bearing a full crown of leaves. She had given it with some generosity in spite of the bare branches showing through the window behind her. 2 figures standing by the house, one tall and one small, the taller one's arm curved around the smaller one's shoulders, and in the lower corner, rendered in careful dark blue strokes, a small compass. 8 points, a single arrow, aimed steadily at the house. I looked at it for a long time. Where does the compass point? I asked. Piper raised her eyes to mine. She held them there a moment, brown and wide, still carrying at their edges the faint shadow of things no child her age should have had to carry. Then the corners of her mouth turned upward slowly and on purpose. Home, she said. I rested my hand on her shoulder and let that be enough. The compass was pointing. The house was there. If you've stayed with me this far, then you know this was never really a story about a company or a legal document or even a kidnapping. It was a story about what a family can do to itself when ambition loses its anchor. What this cost me is difficult to put simply. It cost me the version of my daughter I had spent a lifetime trying to believe in. It cost me a season of sleep, of certainty, of the quiet confidence I had carried for 40 years, that the people nearest to me were who I believed them to be. I believe God allowed me to find Piper in that warehouse, not because I was owed it, but because she had done everything a 9-year-old child could do to be found. The compass pointed home. That was grace. If this story taught me anything worth passing on, let me leave it with you plainly. First, the people who understand your vulnerabilities most clearly are not always the ones who will protect them. Choose who you trust with the architecture of your life very carefully. Second, when a child reaches for it, you reach back. Whatever else is on your desk, in your calendar, in your worry, reach back first. Third, mercy is not weakness, but it is not a blank check either. You can forgive someone and still refuse to hand them the instrument they used against you. Fourth, sometimes the warning you needed was already written. Cecilia saw what was coming, long before I did. Listen to the people who love you without wanting anything from you in return. If this story moved you, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone carrying a weight like this one, someone who needs to be reminded that it is possible to come through the other side, please pass this along to them. It costs nothing and may mean more than you know. Subscribe to Family Revenge Stories so you're here for the next one. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Take good care of the people in your corner. I'll see you in the next story.